Not hearing anyone else on the phone. As soon as Miss Brawley comes around the corner, we'll get started. Who's that? We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Today we're having a work session on the 120-day memo. Today is September the 12th, 2025. We're on the record from 1 to 3 p.m. It's now 1:07 p.m. We're getting a bit of a late start. We'll start with introductions. Mr. Girker.
Jared Girker here.
Daniel Ball.
Anna Brawley.
Christopher Constant.
Yara Silvers.
On the phone, Mr. Myers.
Yes, thanks, Chair.
Thanks. Anyone else on the phone? All right, so it feels like we're having a little feedback with the mic, so just make sure when you're not talking, you turn your mic off. With that, then I'm gonna let the budget co-chairs make brief introduction, and then we'll hand it over to the administration.
Yeah, and I'll be very brief because this is really the administration's presentation, but this is kind of one of our first official briefings on a piece of the budget. So they'll go through kind of what that is and why. So thank you everybody for being here. And I will just also refer back on Tuesday, we passed our assembly resolution on budget priorities. I am blanking on the number of that, but I'm hoping to continue that conversation of how those high level priorities are reflected in the budget and as we move through the process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to others.
All right, anything else to add from the budget? No, okay. Ms. Browse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to ask the mayor to open us up here with some remarks about our 120 memo.
Thank you, Director Browse, and thank you, Mr. Chair. So hello, everyone. Thank you for making time to be here today. And as we begin the budgeting process for 2026, as you know, we're also celebrating the municipality's 50th anniversary. It's a great time to really think about where we are as a community and how we got here. It's also a great time to have open, direct conversations with each other and community members about our budget challenges, our community needs, and where we want to be in the next 5, 10, or 50 years. The municipal budget is a plan for turning our values and priorities into action. It's a roadmap to our community's future. My administration is committed to working with the Assembly and the public to build a stronger, more resilient, more affordable, and safer Anchorage for all. We all know the municipality's resources are limited. Our operating budget relies mostly on property taxes. We are bound by the tax cap. Like me, you all probably hear daily from residents about road repairs, camp abatements, fire and police response, park maintenance, and more. People want a vibrant downtown and other neighborhoods. They want safe routes to school for their kids. They want roads plowed quickly. But what we also all know is that the amount of state and federal dollars supporting our community has declined steeply over the last 15 years. And we know we're facing further reductions in some revenue streams for 2026. As someone said at the last assembly meeting, no one is coming to help us. We have to solve our budget challenge ourselves. Despite these challenges, my team is working to bring forward a balanced budget proposal that builds on our recent successes and makes strategic investments to continue our momentum. My administration is prioritizing public safety and health, delivering quality and effective government services, and investing in our community's long-term future. And we're prioritizing investments in community development, parks and trails, libraries, housing solutions, and other steps to ensure Anchorage is an affordable place to live and an attractive place to do business. And I just want to note too, when I say Anchorage, I'm referring to the municipality of Anchorage. I know, with all due respect, Member Gerker and the communities that you represent, I am not just referring to the bowl, but I just want to be very clear, our entire community, our community of communities. Beyond the 2026 budget, I look forward to working with the Assembly and the public in the coming months to decide how we can provide the services, infrastructure, and amenities that our community wants and that our community needs. So again, thank you all so much for being here, and I look forward to the conversation, and thank you for providing to us your priorities via resolution.
Ms. Browse.
Thank you, Mayor LaFrance. I will start by adding to some of what the mayor has already mentioned. You know, we are in our 50th anniversary of Munification, and because of that, we have an opportunity to really look back over a track record. I think because we are such a young city, seeing a longevity of performance and actuals has, you know, sometimes takes a while. We have a lot of changing revenues and environmental impacts. But over the last 20, 25 years in particular, our budget has been made up of relatively the same components moving in and out. And so in looking forward at the next 50 years, in OMB, we have been looking at the last 50 years to see how things have changed and shifted, what those impacts were to the community when those changes were made, whether or not they were positive changes. Should they be, you know, amended, adjusted? Should we take lessons from those things? And in going through and doing a lot of research and looking at previous information, we learned a lot of things that we all sort of feel to be true. But I think we want to know what the real numbers and the real answers are to understand whether or not these things are actually true. And so part of our budget process over the next 2 months will include sharing some of that information and going through and sort of analyzing what the municipality has come through and where we want to go. So today we're reviewing the 120-day memo, which is required by code to be delivered to the Assembly 120 days before the end of the calendar year. So this summarizes our preliminary revenue and budget information, the code requirements as listed in the memo, but also up here on the screen are that we include preliminary 2026 revenue estimates, the 2026 tax limit calculation, the administration's priorities, including any departmental changes or reorgs, the capital budget, the capital program, and the utilities and enterprises budgets and work plans for the following year, as well as any major departmental consolidations, and you'll see some of that mentioned next. But so in the full 120 memo, which is about 70 pages with all of the attachments, all of these things are included in there as preliminarily compiled with the information we have available from Public Finance and Treasury. The administration's priorities, as outlined in the 120 memo, are as to what the mayor spoke about. We're working in an environment with limited resources and a lot of challenges when it comes to funding. Our list of 4 items in the priorities include the continued focus on staff recruitment, strengthening public safety teams and crisis response, providing stable year-round housing or shelter while transitioning to housing, and investing in the community. Items 1 and 3 are particularly impactful in the budget in a very specific way, in that the continued focus on staff recruitment and retention is a change from the last few years where we have seen a sort of record number of vacancies throughout the municipality. And that left a lot of flexibility within the annual budgets because the vacancies left labor funding available for the departments to be moved around. We also lapsed a lot of funding on an annual basis between 21 and 24 because of those vacancies. Now that we are staffed up almost to where we want to be, those lapsing funds will no longer be present at the end of the year, or theoretically shouldn't be. So that is, we're getting closer and closer to living our true budget in our actual expenses. The stable year-round shelter is also sort of culmination of the last 5 years of figuring out where does Anchorage fit in this continuum. And with the loss of shelter provision starting in 2020 based on the pandemic and a lot of the rules associated, the municipality has struggled with where does this fit in our community, and are we the responsible parties to pick up this this deficit? And the budget from 25 shows a transition into what we think that stable plan looks like, and the 26 budget will reflect additional stability through there. Any questions on those items? The proposed reorganization is small compared to last year, where we moved a whole lot of stuff around. This reorg is essentially splitting the community development and public works columns into 2 separate columns. And Municipal Manager Went Pearson can speak to that in more detail if you like, as she is the boss of those columns. But the goal there is to align with the mayor's priorities to focus on housing and development, and how to make these assets within our community of facilities, streets, and development all work together to improve Anchorage.
I have a question for Ms. Bradley.
Yeah, thanks. And I imagine there might be more discussion about that later, but I'm curious kind of, because I know there's multiple layers. So what is the general logic of having, because we've got a, public works director, community development, and then we have all the departments underneath that. So what is the rationale for having kind of those 2 levels of leadership? Thanks.
It's a very good question to the chair, Time Member Rowley. This actually, part of the goal here is to eliminate those multiple layers, because right now what we have is we have the PDPW position, which sits over and above the real estate planning and development services departments, and then also above the public works director, who in turn sits above the M&O, PM&E, and traffic departments. And so this effectively breaks the 2 into acknowledging that we don't need that many layers of middle management. It creates inefficiencies in trying to achieve the key goals that we're trying to achieve in both places. Both of those teams will have a competent person who can drive them without needing that multiple layers of middle management. And really, this also creates the space for the person who will lead the real estate planning and development services team to focus heavily on driving the components of the mayor's housing agenda, which require the synergy of those 3 departments. So it, again, effectively eliminates those multiple layers. And that's part of the rationale. It's strategic because it supports the 10,000 homes in 10 years plan, but it also is organizationally rational, because having more layers of middle management doesn't necessarily add value.
Just to kind of follow up for my own mental clarification, what we're essentially doing here is raising up Public Works into its own primary department, instead of having it be subordinate under where all the planning and permitting and works and all that was. We're leaving that really under the community umbrella and then moving. You could say it the other way, but really that's what's going on. Works is getting its own top line on the budget.
That's correct. Works gets its own top line. The whole organization of there actually breaks in 2 as opposed to being nested.
Thank you.
So next in the 120 memo is the general government revenue preliminary numbers. So this whole page translates into the tax cap calculation in the next page of the packet. But these are the current projections based on Treasury and Public Finances information from the year so far throughout 2025, and what we see as economic indicators for some of these items for 2026. For the most part, the bulk of these revenues don't change or swing dramatically on a year-to-year basis, except potentially for transfers from other funds, which is really us moving money around from places within the municipality to give ourselves revenue. So there's SEMT money, there are transfers from public finance and from hydro that go through and show up as revenue there. So while that number is 13.5 million lower than the 25 number, we haven't loaded all of those transfers into the budget yet. So that number, once trued up as part of the proposed budget, should be different and theoretically lower than that. The PILT and MUSA MISA both have slight increases due to assessment increases. The room tax has a small decrease to align with the projection that potentially we're going to see a drop off in tourism. The state and federal revenue decrease is due to majority community assistance from the state of Alaska being decreased by $3 million, as well as a reduction in SEMT revenues that we're seeing projected, at least right now, from the state and federal reimbursement. We'll see how that actually shakes out when we get the application submitted and the revenue returned. But so that is a small, well, I guess that's a pretty significant decrease. But the alcohol and marijuana sales taxes basically sort of level themselves out with a slight increase in marijuana and a slight decrease in alcohol sales. So overall, there's not a significant loss of revenue except for the state and federal revenue funds and potentially any transfers that we may need to work with throughout the proposed budget process. But those are the initial top lines. Any questions there?
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, I want to call attention to the room tax, excuse me. There's room tax, there's the motor vehicle rental tax, and then to some extent, the alcohol and marijuana tax are arguably not all driven by tourism, or visitors, I should say. So I guess reading between the lines, it seems like we are expecting a softer, basically tourism or visitor season. And I wonder, is that truly tourism? Is it conferences? Like, do you have any sense of kind of what those numbers, like what is the assumptions behind that decrease?
Through the chair to member Brawley, I am not sure, but I will ask Treasury and Public Finance and we can get a report either during Budget and Finance or as a follow-up to this.
Yeah, and that's right. So we are, I know that's something we get briefed at the committee, so that could be a committee question. But I also want to just generally call attention for members, the ones under the non-property taxes under the limit, that is the everything else other than property tax that pays for government, essentially. And so that's why it's so important to look at any trends in these. These are all basically assuming they're flat for the most part, but we have seen variation in those numbers considerably in the past, so.
Okay. So this is the full page of the tax limit calculation. Since we can't see it, I broke it into smaller, slightly more legible screenshots for the room. And when you go through the tax limit calculation, the items in step 1 and step 5 are the same taxes going in and out, just with different amounts based on the year that they're, transitioning into. And so you will see the preliminary 120 memo revenues on the right-hand side column reflect the numbers that were just shown on the previous page. And in step 2, you see the $3.5 million of ARDSA levy that was approved in 2025 being backed out. You'll see it return in step 4 as it's added in again. This is part of the continuation budget process. We take the one-time things out and then add anything that is supposed to be added back in the subsequent year. So the ARDSA fleet levy, the taxes or the judgments and settlements come out, the emergency ordinances that were assessed in 2025 to close out the COVID pandemic, the Highland earthquake, and I think there was one other small dollar emergency closeout. But so those are one-time increases. And we have a little bit of an issue that we need to resolve in that traditionally our point of reference for the population number for Anchorage has been the AEDC economic report on an annual basis. And in speaking with AEDC this year, they are no longer doing those reports in that same way. And so they won't have the population number available. We'll be going to where their source may have been in order to originate that number for the calculation. But you'll see that as a note as we go through the budget process, because we're going to have to establish this sort of new standardized baseline for that.
So I'm going to jump in there real quick. I guess for all these years, I never realized. I'm going to restate this. We have taken to calculate our tax cap AEDC's number.
The population number, yes.
Thank you. That is very interesting.
It is stated in the budget book every year.
I had, it was 1,000 lines, thousand lines. That is a fascinating piece of information.
So the CPI calculation includes the projection for next year, but we won't revise that necessarily until the first quarter and when we see the actual CPI number for 2025. The new construction assessment comes in at $3 million. The voter-approved O&M that is rolling over for 2026 is $345,000. We're reinstituting the $3.5 million ARDSA levy. And then the judgments and settlements and emergency ordinances line would be filled out if there are any items to go into those categories when we reach the proposed budget and the revised budget.
Quick question for Ms. Bradley.
Yeah, could you unpack a little bit the new construction? So, because I'm assuming that we've seen even last year or this year, more than $2.6 million of actual building being constructed. So I'm curious, because this is the tax, right? So how does what's being built translate into this?
So these numbers are the tax value of those assessments. So this number, so the 2.636, I'm going to use the 24 number because that's the number I have in front of me. In 2024, our new construction tax addition was 4.2 million, but the new construction assessed valuation was 193 million. So the new buildings are worth 193 million, but we're getting $4 million of taxes out of them. And so that's where the bump comes from. So step 5 is when we add the projected 26 revenues back in, or take them out, I'm sorry. And then we get the total limit on property taxes that can be collected within the cap at preliminary numbers right now is 367 million, which is about a little less than $12 million more than the 2025 revised number. The property taxes to be collected are yet to be determined, obviously, but that will come as part of the proposed budget and through the revised process. Any questions there? Okay. The other items included in the 120 memo are the capital budget and capital program summaries, as well as the details from all of the departments. Like last year, the Assembly had requested that we contemplate showing all of the department requests as opposed to a subset that is being recommended by the mayor in this first step. So this is not a list of all of the projects that we are requesting for the bonds. You'll see at the bottom, it's about 105 million. That is not the bond request. That is all of the departmental requests that they would like to see for their departments if they were able to. So you can go through the lists that are attached in the memo and see what all of those requests look like. I think the 25 total number was around 100 and change, and then the actual bond total was 69 million, I believe. So there is some reduction in those amounts and some alignment in how those are presented to the community for funding. Any question on those?
Mr. Vaughn.
Thank you. Okay, so can you walk us through the process of, so these are all the departmental requests. Does each department have their own, like, are these just all in the queue and being brought up to the top? Or every year are the departments going and saying, hey, we're hearing a lot of support for, you know, X project, we're going to put that in higher in the list? Like, how are these projects making the list?
Through the chair to member Voland, I think it depends on which department you're speaking of, but for the most part, to answer your question, I would say yes to both of your questions. The first is that they are sort of in the queue and planned, particularly for PM&E and Parks and Rec. We have the sort of feasibility and design phase, and then we have the construction phase. And so they like to have multiple projects in multiple phases so that we're not doing all construction one year and all feasibility and develop another. year. And we have to align the projects for build with available funding. And anytime the projects have additional funding partners like the state or the feds, we work with them to figure out when that funding is coming in and if there's any construction that has to be aligned specifically around their calendars. But the piece about whether or not they are in line with sort of community commentary bubbling up about deep needs or emergency repairs, all of the departments are in tune with those. And that's why you'll see sometimes projects move from being in the capital program, 3 years later to being in the budget or the bond the following year because, a water main breaks or because a sinkhole appeared or because something happened that pushes them up to the top of the queue in an emergency response. Depending on how emergent the problems are, the departments have some annual programming to fix those kinds of problems. But the Parks and Rec and PM&E and public transportation in particularly, I know that they have, how do we make these improvements in a way that is responsive to the community, but also keeps all of our maintenance rolling? If there's other detail around how the departments make their selections. I don't know if Becky knows any of the other PM&E style work, but they have, I think Parks has recently a capital review program change that sort of answers all of those questions that you're asking about how they do it and how they plan to do it. And we can include them in the capital work session in October for more detail or more questions.
I just said that's correct. They've been trying to align with the PM&E process to try and make sure that they're doing that kind of regular process and making sure that they're, again, where the choices are made are protected by process and broader input than simply the department's own ordering.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's very helpful. I guess, one thing that we don't have a lot of window into is how certain projects are prioritized. If each department has their own scoring criteria, I don't know. But we did issue assembly guidance to add as a priority, for instance, housing density. So projects being prioritized where more people live and can benefit, whether that's parks or sidewalk upgrades. So I would be interested in seeing how some of those projects, how that element was considered. Thanks.
I'm sorry if I zoned out. I think I heard the implication in there, but did we come up with a process for fairly reviewing the proposals for the CASA program? Kind of in line with what Mr. Mullen is saying over here about we have some priorities we've asked. Is there a fair group that's working now, not just kind of advocates from the service areas, the limited road service areas?
I can jump in, Mr. Chair. Yes, Kent Colehouse has been leading some outreach, including talking to community councils, LRSAs, et cetera. And we have heard from a couple of assembly members about particular projects and are working to ensure that we have both projects that complement one another in terms of road versus parking facilities, as well as geographic dispersion.
Yes, I am hopeful that as we make our way through the process, the train doesn't crash on CASA again, that the work is done in advance to make sure that all the parties are heard from. So that's my hope. Anna?
Yeah, actually, I can share just a quick anecdote from, I went to Taco Campbell Community Council last night, and they did actually have Chugach, the full thing, not just the acronym on there. And the council chair, because they represent Diamond Mall area, that area. And I think for lack of having the context of what that is, they weren't disparaging or anything. They just said like, oh, well, this is about hillside stuff. We don't live there. But if you're interested, give a comment. So I did say basically like, this is important because it is for public access. And so I think probably just the nature of it is that a lot of people who we want to hear from may not understand that connection or see it. And so I think it's really just a kind of a communication or messaging thing. Cause I did frame it as like, if you go up there and you want trail improvements or things like that, encouraged individuals. But I just know I could see why that perception happened. And it wasn't because they didn't care. They just didn't, it looked like something that wasn't their area.
And I would add one thing, which is that in talking with Kent about how we develop the criteria and the plan for CASA, he's been working on trying to put together an advisory group to work with him on that process. And one of the clear directions I've given him is it needs to be geographically diverse, because this needs to encompass the use, like trail users from across the municipality. And so I would say, if you have anyone who you think would be a good idea to be included in that, he'd be a good voice for state park access, who maybe is not living on the hillside. It would be fantastic to know who those people are.
Downtown has ideas.
Excellent.
Paxton Welber,
Yeah.
straight up. He lives
He's building
Oh,
a
he
house.
is on
he's
Hillside.
building- well, actually,
No, his residence is in South Addition.
yeah, he grew up in South Addition.
Yeah, his residence is South Addition.
He's building a house on the hillside, doesn't live there yet.
He's got
So,
sons
yeah,
both
perfect.
Ah.
Yeah, so that is really helpful to hear. And I'd be, yeah, certainly interested in forwarding you some names. I think that would be a good name to have in the mix, but also would love to see, as an ARDSA person myself who loves Chugach State Park access, us kind of do something in this moment with access to the Stewart Trail. I think that's something I hear a lot from folks, is they want to be able to enjoy that. And when you go up there, there's a lot of no parking signs, and there's the signs that property owners have put there that make it seem like a hostile environment. So if we can do something with that, I think that'd be great. Thanks.
You want to jump in, Ms. Fleetgreen?
I think many people appreciate the opportunities of Stewart Trail. I too have heard from many of the people that you have, and heard.
So and I'll just add one coda to that. If community councils are seeing this thing and they're saying, well, it's their neighborhood, doesn't matter to us, the actual answer is that, well, except you're paying, right? That's the thing that people disconnect from, is it seems like something over there, but no, the way this bond program works, or funding program, this service area works, is we all pay. So we all have a stake. All right, Anna.
Yeah, and actually, that is kind of the conversation we had, and it was tied to the Muni 50th, to say, hey, did you know that there's all these service areas, and folks that are in that area are not paying for the roads around, anyway, yeah, so it's definitely a good conversation to have.
All right, so I think probably the message is heard. All right, we can move on.
So the next summary page in 120 memo, obviously the summary pages are backed by all of the detail pages that get you the numbers, but this is the capital improvement program summary. So this is the projection from all of the departments over the next 6 years of what they expect or project their capital needs to be. We had a question from the Budget Advisory Commission yesterday that was, do we see a sort of decrease in need as we get into the out years, particularly for something like M&O, where it shows, a decline of $32 million to $11 million? And the answer is no. Every time we get to the next year, the number gets bigger as we realize what the needs are. So right now, the 6-year projection is $11 million, but when we get to 2030, that number will likely also be $30 or $40 million in terms of need. One of the challenges that the municipality deals with on a regular basis is that a lot of the cost items included in these capital improvement budgets and programs are actually maintenance costs. So when you go through the list of bond projects and other projects that are for all of the departments, you'll see items that say annual program. So it says, signage and signal annual program, drainage annual program. Those are actually maintenance amounts. And so that is the funding that would normally in other budgets be in an operating budget, because the maintenance of those assets is theoretically required. But because of the limitation on our resources, those items are regularly and only included in the bond questions. So those amounts are variable on a policy decision and annual basis, depending on how the administration and the assembly decides to set those amounts. The bond from 2025 was higher in those allocations, particularly for traffic and for streets, because the mayor's focus was on pedestrian safety and making those improvements. And we had seen a decrease in the annual program funding for those items in particular. If we were to remove the annual funding lines from all of our bond requests that we ask on an annual basis, it is between 20 and $50 million. And so that is a dollar amount that should be in our budget for operating costs of the assets we own. But because of the way the municipality has budgeted over the 50 years, it is shunted to the bond request and capital maintenance program that regularly is deferred.
Daniel.
Yeah, thank you. I absolutely appreciate the mayor's focus on pedestrian safety, and I think the increase in the traffic calming budget last budget season was pretty great to see. I'm wondering, would OMB be willing to create like a one-pager or like a short PowerPoint for assembly members on the types of projects that can and cannot go on a bond? Because we hear it said a lot, you know, you can't do any operations and maintenance on a bond, or maybe you can, but it can't be standalone, or what's the other thing? It can't just be like design money. It has to be tied to an actual capital improvement. So just be interesting to get like a sort of short and simple cliff notes of that, so that if we're thinking about amending bond packages, we have some guidance.
Yep, through the chair to member Voland, we can do that. We'll talk with our bond counsel and with the departments and come up with some sort of documentation that says, if this, then that, and here's how and why. I think that that is a confusing procedure there.
Awesome, thank you.
So on the summary, you'll see after the 6 years, the total in the far right column is $1.2 billion. So that is, you know, theoretically, if we were recommending all of these things to be funded right now over the next 6 years, we would need $1.2 billion to fund those. The detail, as I said, is in the attachments to the memo, but it's a very large number.
Hold on one second, Ms. Bly.
Yeah, it's not on this, we don't need to go back to the last one, but I know, and this is in our budget books, always the breakdown of what goes for bonds, state, federal, and other. Not to get in those weeds, but I'm wondering how, just generally, how much of this kind of future year outlays is kind of state requests, or I should say, how many of them are outside of, because I think AMATS is in there, so there's like federal money that goes through the state and so on, but beyond that, those kind of formulas, like, because it's been true for a long time that we put all these things on our state requests and then knowing that we're not going to get, you know, any of them necessarily or very many.
Right.
So I'm just wondering how much that continues to be an assumption in here. And that is a question more to dig into on the capital budget when we get there. But I'm just curious in general with these numbers too, is half of it state for PM&E, or, you know, it looks like it was in that 1 year.
Yeah, and through the chair to member Brawley, I think the next slide sort of addresses this a little bit, but we'd have to go in and sort of figure out exactly which projects that they're saying are requested for the state to get the AMATS funding. But I think the message of the state doesn't have any funding, why should we continue to go there for all of these projects? You know, 20 years ago, the legislative priority book was a binder this thick that had hundreds of projects available for funding in everybody's district, by House district, by Senate district, and then also area-wide projects. And now, you know, we know that our legislative priority program is 2 pages, 3 pages, depending on how many pages it is. I think you have, you know, 4 things in everybody's assembly district that might be an option for funding. And the actual successful funding of those things is very few and far between. The next page is the 20 years of state funding summarized. So because we have 50 years of funding to look back on, and because we traditionally have had a funding partner in the state of Alaska, there is a lot of funding that has come into Anchorage as part of the state budget. we traditionally, outside of the capital funding amount that comes through the capital budget from the legislature, also have the state community assistance and revenue sharing program. We currently have the community assistance program. Revenue sharing is no longer part of the equation. But for the 10 years between 2005 and 2014, the state passed through over $1 billion to Anchorage in terms of our capital projects and our revenue sharing and community assistance. When that community assistance funding comes into the municipality, it is free funding in terms of it's not restricted for spend. We can spend it on operating costs, we can spend it on capital costs. And in those 10 years, we had $1 billion of infusion and benefit to the community. And in the 10 years from 2015 to 2024, the state provided $300 million. So in the last 10 years between 2015 and 2024, the municipality has lost over $700 million in revenue. And that is not anecdotal. We were baseline funded by the state, participating in our budget for decades. And we were essentially, if we were going to equate it at a $2025, we were funded at an $800 million budget. And now we have a $600 million budget. And that is why it feels like we are losing all of our infrastructure around us, because for 10 years, we've lost $700 million that would have been put into our roads and our buildings. And eventually, we're going to have the conversation that is, are we going to let this infrastructure deteriorate into absolute demolition, or are we going to have the conversation about what can we do with this? In that same 10 years, we've added roads, we've added buildings. And so the costs associated with operating the municipality have increased greatly, while also losing $700 million in revenue. And that is a very, very large dollar amount. And when we think about losing that much money on a 10-year basis, as a business, we need to do something different, because we're not going to be able to sustain the assets and infrastructure that we currently have, or do better.
Ms. Silvers.
I'm just curious how much of that 257 is for the port?
The 257?
Yeah, the 2015.
2015 to
Yeah.
2024.
Oh, almost all of it.
Okay.
220 million, I believe.
Okay, so that actually even
Yeah,
accentuates the
Correct.
difference.
I think it would be great to have a call out of some element to that effect when this comes forward again.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just to, I'll bring it back around so it's a little slightly happier thing. In thinking about all of these things and trying to analogize, like, how do we think about this from our perspective? I came across this article from RDH, which is, the footnote, is a national consulting and engineering firm on building science. And they have equated the age of buildings to human years. And this explanation of how we invest and expense our buildings and our infrastructure as related to who we are as humans is very fascinating. Because on this page, it's broken out into subsets of years: prenatal, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and old age. And as we go through all of these little explanations of what we would assume as building owners to have to do to require, upkeep, maintenance, and our buildings being in operational order, our largest costs happen in adolescence and adulthood between 17 and 49 years old. And the municipality is 50. So all of our infrastructure falls into that category almost entirely. So the two most expensive stages of life are where we are walking into with our infrastructure. And in that same frame, we have lost $1 billion in funding to pay for our infrastructure and our aging. And I think that that is a very serious item to look at going forward, because if we do not straighten out where we have our maintenance and funding right now, the infrastructure of the community will continue to deteriorate and become less and less livable.
Just gonna say, I have to object.
Yeah,
Have to object to
because look,
this.
it's all us. We're
Object to
humans.
this framing and just say that 40 is the new 25. So we need to reframe these numbers. That's all I gotta say.
I think what you're saying is Anchorage needs bifocals. Is
That's
that
right.
correct?
That's right. Fierce
Anna?
reading glasses, yes.
Yeah, I really appreciate this metaphor. And yeah, actually, on the point of kind of building years, it's interesting because on the one hand, you have buildings that were built that are still standing, that are thousands of years old, hundreds of years, so it matters the quality of the construction and the materials and what they're intended for. On the extreme other side is a Walmart. The functional life of a Walmart building is 7 years. That is the depreciation period for a big box retail store, with the idea that they are not meant to be 50-year buildings, let alone 200-year buildings. And so, and I think our infrastructure obviously was not built like a Walmart, but it is important to recognize that a lot of our buildings, and including some public ones, were built very quickly. A lot of our housing, the reason we have these issues is because they were built quickly and then with not great construction sometimes. Or even if they were well built, they are like the pack where they might have structural flaws or just issues that have not aged well. And so this is, to your point, you can measure buildings in different timescales, but it also matters how they were built, when they were built, and what they were built for. And clearly, a lot of our infrastructure was built with the idea that someone was not thinking 100 years ahead. So no shade on those who built it, but it's just true.
And through the chair, I would also say that if you look at the old age category at the bottom, it says, at this juncture, the major assets have been through one renewal cycle. Therefore, life stage 5 is essentially a return to life stage 2, not for humans. But if we have done our building maintenance and investment the way that we are supposed to, then when you get to 50 plus years, you're a brand new building again because you've rehabbed everything that came before you. So there is a mitigating factor on the quality of build at the beginning, but only if you do the ongoing maintenance throughout life. Otherwise, you could have a highly quality built building still fall apart because the maintenance is not performed.
Stem cells.
Hmm?
Stem cell. Renewal. No, my house is 65 years old and it is definitely in its adolescence. Really?
It's because you live there.
No, it's the house is just perfectly made, just the right time. The beams are still blonde in the unexposed places, like shocking. But the point is, your point is well taken, Hannah, that it depends on a lot of variables. Okay, that's the last of the slides, right?
Yep.
So, any other questions? Dan?
This is maybe a small, silly one, but I see in the list of projects, the I Street stairs. Can we just tear those down? What's going on with those?
Through the chair, number 1, we've talked about it. We've thought about, I mean, it's a community connection that a number of people have said they rely on and they value. So short of tearing it down, we have been talking with DOT about whether there's a possibility where they tear it down and we put in something far cheaper that serves the same purpose, like just stairs embedded into the earth or something like that. And so the regional director has been considering whether there might be something that they could address in their budget this year. And then, but I would say the short answer is absolutely, we have been considering all the options, including tearing them down completely because they have become something of a nuisance, or finding a much cheaper option so that we can preserve the connectivity that's provided by those stairs, which we have heard that people do value.
Great, thanks.
Anna?
Yeah, I think as you guys are looking at the actual budget, I guess, I'm interested in, you mentioned, we have more roads, we have more buildings. I think it would be helpful, and I'm not asking for a detailed analysis, but the other thing that comes to mind is the services we've added. So we have expanded and kind of redone what the safety patrol does. We've added the mobile crisis team to the fire department, and granted, we've used alcohol tax, which is outside of the cap for that. But I'm also, because I think it's just helpful for all of us to really pull that thread forward of kind of how many more services have been added or maintenance responsibilities, like you said, and if any have dropped off. So I know, people always talk about the things we used to do when we had more money to do them or whatever. And so I'm not looking for a catalog of those, but I think it would be helpful because so much of what we're talking about is also helping the public understand the budget, which I know is a goal, and to just have the difficult conversations that we're going to have about what we value and what we prioritize. But I'm wondering, in the meantime, Are there other kind of big things that come to mind, like mobile crisis team, like new services that we've added or types of investment? I guess shelter is another big one that was not something we used to pay for. And so anyway, I just think some characterization of that would be helpful with some examples because it does illustrate how the pressures on our budget have changed over time.
Yeah, we can include those as part of the next budget conversation.
So did you have a chance to review the Assembly guidance document that passed 2 nights ago or 3 nights ago?
Yes?
Did anything stick out as not achievable or as kind of, where are your thoughts on the kind of how we kind of approach that conversation? Again, I apologize, we didn't steward that earlier. Comes late in the game, in my opinion, but I want to make sure that that conversation happens just a little bit. Like, how does it work for you?
For me right now, as far as I know, is it achievable? I can't answer that question because we have to actually load the revenues and see what's possible and what we can do. I think that, with the priorities that align with the mayor's priorities in terms of not decreasing any of the, public safety services or the things that we have currently, I think that is absolutely achievable. But in terms of what is possible, that's what we're working on right now.
Right, so I think you just highlighted something that there are probably some areas that are easy done. And so maybe there's some communication on that back to the body that's like, check, 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 check. These other ones we're working on. And so I think maybe that'll be helpful in kind of harmonizing the approach towards the end of the process, as that whole purpose of that exercise is to create harmony and not kind of break down in the communication.
Do you mean in advance of the budget proposal?
I know you're busy. And so I think somehow along the way, so members understand where the trajectory is going so that when it happens, nobody's like, oh my God, they didn't listen to us. Or if they do, they can be rebutted with, but we told you.
Got it.
Right. And so I don't know, you guys have to approach that. And again, I wish it was in July, August, we sent that to you, but here it is. So what I hear you say is there are some areas easy. And so we'll look forward to that conversation.
We work for the government. There are some areas that are easy and some that are not.
Yes, understood. Other questions? Daniel?
Yeah, I think in our resolution, there's not a lot of specific directives. There's more like general priorities. And from what I see in the 120-day memo, I think there's a lot of cohesion. One that does strike me, I think that is in our resolution, is funding for the mobile crisis team, maybe moving that out of the alcohol tax. And I think highlighted in the memo here is the fact that maybe the SCMT revenue is going to be lower. We have talked about in the past, maybe using that as part of the source for funding the MCT. So I don't know, do you have thoughts? Is it too early to think about how we're funding the mobile crisis team and hopefully growing it?
Through the chair to member Voland. Yes, it is too early. But to answer your question, I think the way that the SEMT funding has been applied in the past is slightly different than the direction from the Assembly, I think 2 or 3 years ago, which is to use SEMT funding specifically towards the fire department. And the main challenge with that is that SEMT up until 3 years ago was a general government revenue. So it would come in and it would go into the general fund and then it would be split however, the costs needed to go the same way other GG dollars are. But now, because it is to be aligned with AFD operations, the line that we drew in the sand in 2023 meant that the SEMT dollar amount that existed in the budget before here is already committed to GG. So if we take it away from general government, that means we have to backfill that hole somewhere. So what is available for AFD funding is any SEMT differential going forward. So if we get $1 million more of SEMT money, then that could go to fund X, Y, and Z. Right now, the budget projection is that we are going to lose SEMT funding so that there wouldn't be any additional SEMT money above our current baseline. And whether or not that comes to be true, we don't know yet. I mean, we've seen SEMT returns come in with more than we thought was going to come back because the calculations with the Fed and the states are different than what we think. And so we'll see how that goes. But it would be a source of funding for that if there was available revenue there. Yeah.
So following on the line of SEMT, what is the basis of the analysis that says it's going to be reduced? Clearly, it's not going to be less calls for service and transport. It's got to be something else.
I don't know. I would have to ask the chief and find out because he does
He put that
the
forward.
application and the reimbursement for it. Yeah, but the numbers that we got as back from finance and treasury was that those numbers are to be lower. So I don't know.
It would be great to understand, like, what is the origin of the reduction? Because, I mean, if it were just targeting people who are on the streets homeless, and maybe there's an argument, we're gonna see less calls because we're getting people sheltered in house, but I don't think we're there yet. And it's broader, it's all transports that are Medicaid eligible. Right, and then that's a great problem to have, right? If the mobile crisis and MIT just were so successful that we didn't have people in crisis, but I think it's something else.
And one of the challenges has to do with our ACFR and the fact that our SEMT reimbursement application is delayed by the availability of the ACFR. So we are on a delayed SEMT reimbursement cycle, right? The money we got in 24 was for 21, I think.
Right. So it could be reduced rates, it could be delayed payments, it could be any
Correct.
number of phenomena that it would be great to have some
Yeah.
insight into what that is.
Budget and finance.
That can just be an email. I could probably ask the chief, but it's better if you do. Okay, other questions? If there were the rest of the body here, we'd probably spend most of the time. But since we have a bunch of people traveling and what feels like a laissez-faire end of the season. Okay, Ms. Brawley.
Sorry, I do have one more specific question, and I think we did refer to it in the resolution, but I know it's come up before. And actually, I know Member Johnson brought it up, and he's not here because he's out of town. The Safer grant for fire department, and I know we also have the bargaining agreement up on our agenda soon. But I know that is something that I got briefed at before I was on this body, and really that it's essentially a time-limited federal grant, and we're almost to the end of it. So I'm wondering if you guys have specifics to share on that, again, knowing all of the things that we just talked about. But I would imagine the community does not want to lose the kind of full staffing on our fire rigs. So what's the thought on that right now?
My understanding is that the Safer grant for 2026 would leave us with a $2.6 million deficit, and we will need to backfill that with general government revenue in order to fund through that. But the AFD has applied for continuing Safer funding, and I think that there is, and maybe Municipal Manager Wimp Pearson knows this better than I do, but I believe that there is the opportunity for continued Safer funding, but at a reduced rate than what we currently have. So it's not 100% loss, but there is a reduction, and we would see it come in 27, I believe.
That's correct. We would have a year gap before we would be eligible again to receive the funding, and there is a match requirement in the next round of Safer funding. I don't recall the exact number off the top of my head, but it's I think something in the order of 20 to 30% of match for municipal funding that would have to go with the Safer funding for it to continue to support those positions.
And this is something you could follow up in detail, but about how many positions is that, and how many, I guess, stations does it, is it something where it's funding somebody in every station, or is it just one part of town, or what is the scale of kind of how this is augmenting our fire department?
Through the chair, I would need to see exactly where those PCNs reside, but it's for 18 firefighters over the 3 years of the grant.
Not that this is not a work session on the fire department, but it was just asserted that we have met the 4-pack status. We haven't, right? We have in some ways. We have to a degree, but we haven't completely met that mark.
To the chair, no, it's not 100% 4-pack status.
So I just want the record to be
I
clear.
believe they apply the 4-packs into the higher utilized stations.
Yeah. So we're not quite there, but great progress after the new administration came in and stopped backfilling with those dollars. Okay. Just to be clear. Okay, other questions? So I will offer that we've been looking really closely at the budget internally. On our side, the assembly budget, because there's been some talk about, oh, it's a big budget. Looking at where the increases have come from, and the largest single increase on our budget that we've been able to analyze is audit expenses related to being back on our heels trying to get the audit done. And so looking over the last several years, that's the largest single increase in our budget, is getting the audit done. And so we look forward to kind of getting back up to ground. I'm really grateful to the administration for tackling those issues so we can stop being on emergency expenditure to get the audit done on time, to stop the end of the world from coming, so we can get back in the regular process hopefully by April, which will hopefully reduce substantially at least one line in our budget.
Thank you. And as a response, I will say that I know it is my goal, and I believe it is the mayor's goal and the other executives in our administration to keep the municipality out of emergency operations, because there has been a fair amount of, challenges associated with the awareness of where everything is and how we should be doing the work. And it creates this chaos cycle of, well, I guess it's a chaos cycle that deteriorates and sort of affects the municipality and its personnel in a way that does actually impact efficiency in the long run. And each one of the papers that we, introduce to the assembly and pass through an agenda is dollars, right? That piece of paper, that agenda item is touched by 14, 15, 25 people, depending on how many review it. And each moment that a person is reviewing those items is $1 or $2 or 25. And when you think about it in terms of, each piece of paper representing $100 in its travel, that's a very expensive process. And so the more we can plan and bring fulsome proposals to say, this is what we think we should do, and this will last us the whole year, means that we only have to do it once.
Another kind of philosophical take at the end of this work session for me that I will continue to say to folks, this slide that presents the kind of withdrawal of the state from funding its commitments in our municipality to the tune of, if you screen out the port's $230 million, it clearly marks $1 billion in 10 years. And that, when people come to me and talk to me about the dilapidated sidewalks, the deterioration they're seeing, and the potholes, and the kind of general frumpiness, for the lack of a better term, of our built environment in our municipality, I hate to be the one who points outward, but we are paying everything we can, using every dollar we have to keep the wheels on and the lights on. And it's really frustrating to find oneself lacking a partner in these initiatives. And so I understand the state's been in a fiscal crisis since 2015, which is that 10-year period right there. And hopefully something changes, because if we have to do this alone, people are going to continue to hear my tax bill went up because the state is receding.
And the items there, the items not included in that amount are the operating reductions as well. So we have pass-through revenue that comes from the state departments in grants and other funding that is not part of that tally. That is strictly the capital budget bill and the revenue assistance dollars. It's not the grants that go into the health department or to the police department, those reductions that we've seen in that capacity as well.
State's road maintenance and shutting down elements of their maintenance facilities or redistributing them. Like, folks just, I hope, understand that it's very complicated. It is not a misallocation of resources at the local level. It's doing the best we can with the resources we have that don't meet the need.
Yep. And
Right,
as the
anyone
mayor
else?
said, we got to do this for ourselves.
We are, and we have been since 2015.
Yeah.
Okay. If there's no one else, then we'll go ahead and adjourn this work session. Thank you to the administration, OMB, for getting this before us.